Aarav Malhotra was a ruthless billionaire CEO, and Ananya Mehta was the quiet wife he never wanted, until he unknowingly fell in love with her all over again, under a fake name. In a world of power, secrets, and betrayal, one arranged marriage spirals into a gripping web of hidden identities, forbidden emotions, and a murder that threatens to destroy everything. This isn't just a love story, it's a true crime thriller where the wife becomes the suspect and the husband becomes the hunter of truth. Aarav Malhotra was the kind of man people feared, admired, and avoided all at once. He was young, powerful, and led one of the country's largest technology empires with an iron grip. Known in corporate circles as the Untouchable CEO, Aarav kept his personal life sealed off from the world, preferring boardrooms over dinner tables and business deals over emotional conversations. His decision to marry was a shock even to his closest advisors, but this wasn't love. It was a merger between two influential families, a carefully calculated alliance, and the bride, Ananya Mehta, was just another name in a long list of things arranged for him. From the outside, Ananya had everything: a billionaire husband, a sprawling mansion, designer clothes, and social status. But behind those glossy photographs and society appearances was a life of isolation. Aarav treated her like a formality, polite in public, cold in private. He barely spoke to her at home, rarely acknowledged her presence, and made it painfully clear that he hadn't wanted this marriage. The mansion was large enough for them to live in separate worlds, and that's exactly what happened. Weeks turned into months. Birthdays were forgotten. Meals were taken alone. Their marriage was a silent agreement. Don't expect anything, and you won't be disappointed. Ananya, however, was not a weak woman. Educated, insightful, and emotionally resilient, she had grown up believing marriage was a partnership. She tried earnestly and patiently to bridge the distance. Small gestures, thoughtful efforts, gentle words, but they all vanished into the void. Aarav responded with nothing. If anything, he grew colder. He viewed her kindness as weakness, her presence as interference. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue, he simply dismissed her existence. It was a different kind of cruelty. Not loud, not violent, just silent and sharp. It drained Ananya day by day, stripping away her sense of self. She was invisible in her own home. Every room echoed with loneliness. The staff looked at her with sympathy. Friends stopped calling. It was as if she had been erased, one quiet moment at a time. Yet Ananya didn't break, she endured. But something inside her began to change. A quiet fire started to burn. A need to reclaim her identity, to feel alive again, to find meaning beyond this soulless arrangement. She knew she couldn't change Aarav, but maybe, just maybe, she could change herself. She began spending more time alone, reading, walking in the garden, and staring at the skyline from the rooftop. That's when the idea came to her, not suddenly, but gradually, like a whisper that turned into a scream. If he wouldn't look at her as a wife, maybe he would see her as someone else. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to be noticed, respected, maybe even loved, not because of an arrangement, but because of who she was. And so, the invisible wife decided to create a new identity. One that would enter his world, not through marriage, but through merit. The stage was set. The game was on. And neither of them knew how dangerous it would become. It started with a haircut. Ananya stood in front of the mirror, scissors trembling in her hand, and cut her long flowing hair into a sharp bob. The strands fell to the floor like pieces of her past, quiet and irreversible. She traded her designer Sarahs for plain shirts, modest trousers, and simple shoes. Her reflection was unrecognizable, even to herself. With the help of a forged identity and a contact from her college days, she applied for a job at one of the satellite offices of Aarav's company, an ordinary branch, far from the polished glass towers where the CEO himself worked. Her new name was Anya Sharma. To anyone she met, she was just another middle-class woman, trying to make ends meet. She carried a basic resume with a fake university name, some light clerical experience, and a neutral personality. Her voice was softer, her posture more reserved. She wore thick glasses and no makeup. Ananya had become Anya completely, and surprisingly, no one suspected a thing. It was easier than she thought to disappear when no one was ever really looking to begin with. As Anya, she joined the administrative department, starting from the bottom, filing reports, organizing schedules, preparing meeting notes. It was mundane work, but it gave her access. And slowly, day by day, she began to study the structure of Aarav's company from the inside. She learned how decisions were made, who had real influence, and what mattered most to the man she had married but never really known. More importantly, she observed Aarav through others, his work ethic, his leadership, his rare visits to different branches, and the way employees spoke about him with both fear and awe. Weeks passed, and one morning, the branch office buzzed with unusual energy. Aarav himself was visiting. It was a surprise audit. Everyone was nervous. Anya kept her head down, careful not to attract attention, but fate had a different plan. Aarav entered the room, glancing around the floor quickly. His gaze swept past her, and paused. Just for a moment, she didn't flinch. He moved on. Over the next few days he visited more often. Meetings were held in the office lounge. At first, Anya remained invisible, part of the furniture. But one day, her calm handling of a last-minute scheduling crisis caught his eye. He asked for her name. She said, "Anya Sharma," without hesitation. He nodded, intrigued, and left. From then on, he began calling on her more often. Small tasks at first, then more complex responsibilities. He liked her quiet confidence, her efficiency, and the way she listened without trying to impress. She reminded him of something he couldn't quite name. Ananya watched him closely too, how his face softened when he wasn't in boardroom mode, how his voice changed when he wasn't pretending to be untouchable. And to her shock, she began to see him not as a cold stranger but as a man who, like her, was wearing a mask. The walls between them began to crack. But neither knew how dangerous it would be when those walls finally came crashing down. Aarav didn't understand what was happening to him. For years, he had built walls no one could climb. Emotions to him were distractions. Relationships were risks. Yet here he was, looking forward to moments that had nothing to do with strategy, profit, or power. Moments where Anya, this quiet, grounded employee, would hand him notes with neat handwriting or gently remind him of overlooked tasks. It wasn't just her efficiency. There was something unspoken in her presence that calmed him. She didn't flatter him, didn't fear him. She simply did her job with grace, intelligence, and silence. He began noticing things he had long forgotten to appreciate. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking, the soft way she nodded when listening, the subtle confidence in how she spoke, never trying too hard. Slowly, she became a habit. He found excuses to walk by her desk, to assign her work that could have gone to anyone else. He started bringing her coffee during meetings, something he had never done for anyone. It was unlike him, yet he didn't resist. For the first time in years, Aarav didn't feel alone. Ananya, hiding behind the name Anya, watched all of this unfold with quiet conflict. She had entered this world hoping to understand him, maybe earn a piece of the attention he had denied her, but she never imagined he would open up. She never expected warmth from the man who had once walked past her like she didn't exist. Now he lingered. Now he smiled. He told her about his childhood, his late mother, his dreams of building something beyond money. He even laughed, real, unguarded laughter. And that's when the guilt began to creep in. This wasn't a stranger anymore. This was her husband, the same man who had broken her spirit, now unknowingly healing it through the very identity he was never supposed to know. The irony crushed her. She didn't know what hurt more, that he loved her only when she pretended to be someone else, or that she was falling for the side of him he never showed her before. Their connection deepened. Aarav began calling her after work, under the pretense of discussing reports. They spoke for hours, about everything and nothing. She started anticipating his voice, reading his moods, sensing when he needed silence and when he needed words. They never touched, never crossed any formal lines, but the emotional intimacy between them grew undeniable. Ananya's heart was torn in two. Every time he smiled at Anya, it reminded her of every moment he had ignored Ananya. Every gesture of care felt like both a reward and a betrayal. She wanted to scream the truth, to rip off the disguise and confront him. But she was afraid that the fragile thread between them would snap, afraid that he would hate her again, afraid that without the mask he might never love her at all. She was living two lives, and both were crumbling. Everything began to shift the day news of a sudden death reached the office. One of Aarav's trusted senior executives, Rakav Sinha, was found dead in his home. The cause was poisoning. The police ruled out suicide. It was deliberate. A murder. Panic spread like wildfire through the company. Whispers filled the corridors. Rakav had access to confidential information, financial records, offshore accounts, and internal audits. If someone had wanted him silenced, it could only mean one thing, something deeper, something buried beneath the surface. Aarav was stunned. He didn't show it outwardly, but this wasn't just an employee, it was someone who had been part of his inner circle for years. He ordered a private investigation immediately, wanting to know what Raghav had been working on in the weeks before his death. Official investigators, meanwhile, began combing through company files, personal messages, and security footage. They were looking for anomalies, for anyone who might have had access to Raghav's work. That's when a name appeared, Anya Sharma. She had been in the building the same night Raghav had stayed late. A camera in the hallway showed her walking past his office hours before he left for home. Though she said she had been organizing files and left early, the timestamp suggested otherwise. Investigators raised eyebrows. She had no prior connection to Raghav, yet she had been assigned to handle documents for his upcoming audit. Her access was legitimate, but her presence near his office on the night of his death drew suspicion. Ananya felt her world tilt. She had worked hard to keep her double life clean, but now she was under a spotlight she never anticipated. She had no motive, no intent, but the situation was rapidly spinning out of control. Worse, the police began pressing for identity verification. Her documents were forged, her qualifications fake. If they dug deeper, everything would collapse. Not just her secret identity, but her entire plan, her marriage, her freedom. Aarav received the news about Anya's possible involvement through his private team. At first, he dismissed it. It had to be a mistake. But as more inconsistencies emerged, the unease grew. Her records were too clean, her past too vague. The more he tried to trace her background, the more he realized there was nothing concrete. No school records, no family, no real digital trail before the year she joined the company. She was a ghost. He confronted the lead investigator quietly, away from the boardroom. "Do you think she could be involved?" Aarav asked, his voice calm but cold. The investigator simply said, "If she's not who she says she is, then she might not be who you think she is either." That night, Aarav couldn't sleep. Images flashed in his mind, the softness in her voice, the kindness in her eyes, the warmth he'd let himself feel. But now those memories were tainted with doubt. He wondered if he had ever really known her, or if he had fallen for a lie. And all the while, Ananya sat alone, knowing that everything she had built, every piece of this risky game, was about to collapse under the weight of a murder she didn't commit. Aarav walked into his private office the next morning with a storm brewing inside him. The walls that once gave him comfort now felt like cages. He had built his empire on control, calculating every risk, knowing every move. But nothing had prepared him for this. The woman he had started to trust, even care for, was suddenly at the center of a criminal investigation. Her entire identity unraveling thread by thread. He ordered her to be brought in. No assistants, no legal team. Just her and the truth. Ananya entered the room as Anya Sharma, but within seconds, the illusion shattered. She could see it in his eyes. He knew There was no use pretending anymore. She took a deep breath and did something she had never done before in front of Aarav. She told the whole truth. From the day he ignored her after their wedding to the night she cut her hair and changed her name. She explained everything. The fake resume, the job application, the carefully maintained cover. She hadn't done it to deceive him, she said. She had done it to feel human again. Aarav stood frozen. The confession hit him like a blow. He had spent months opening up to someone, lowering his guard for the first time in years, and it turned out she had been in his life all along. His wife, the same woman he had once pushed into the background without a second thought. A twisted knot of shame and betrayal coiled in his chest. He wanted to scream, to ask why, but more than anything he wanted to erase the past few months and start over with a version of her that hadn't needed to hide. But reality wasn't that forgiving. Before he could say anything, his phone rang. It was the police. New evidence had come in, strong enough to warrant an arrest. A fingerprint found on Raghav's desk matched Anya's. A blurry image on CCTV showed someone of her build leaving the office late that night. She was the only person with access who couldn't account for her time. The authorities were on their way. Ananya's face turned pale as Aarav looked at her, torn between disbelief and fury. For a brief second, he questioned everything again. Had she been lying the entire time? Was it all just a performance? But a flicker of fear in her eyes reminded him of something more powerful than doubt. His instincts said she was innocent. He knew she was being framed, but he didn't know by whom or why. It all felt too clean, too convenient. Someone was using her double identity as a weapon. But why target her? Why now? Before she was taken away, Ananya whispered one thing. Check the audit files Raghav was preparing. Someone doesn't want them seen. And then she was gone, escorted out of the building, not as a wife or employee, but as a suspect in a murder investigation. Aarav stood alone in the office, gripping the edge of his desk. Everything had changed. He no longer knew who to trust. But one thing was certain. He wasn't letting this end without a fight. Aarav spent the next several days buried in silence, away from public view and boardroom meetings. He had handed over the reins of daily operations to his deputy, while he poured through every piece of evidence he could get his hands on. Raghav's audit files had been sealed after his death, but Aarav, leveraging his power and connections, gained access. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Raghav had been on the verge of exposing a massive internal fraud, millions siphoned out of shell accounts, falsified invoices, and falsified reports cleverly hidden over time. The trail didn't lead to a stranger. It led directly to someone Aarav had trusted blindly, his longtime friend and chief financial officer, Dev Mehra. Dev had managed Aarav's wealth, attended family events, and been a silent observer through all the chaos in Aarav's personal life. Now he was the man at the center of a conspiracy that included theft, deception, and murder. Raghav had discovered the fraud weeks before his death and had quietly begun compiling a report. He hadn't yet submitted it officially, possibly hoping to confront Dev or gather more proof. Ananya, while operating under her fake identity, had unknowingly assisted Raghav in preparing and organizing several parts of this file. That was her mistake. She had seen too much without realizing it, and someone had noticed. Dev had carefully planted evidence to frame Ananya, counting on her false identity to crumble under scrutiny. He knew the moment questions arose about her background, she would lose credibility. With her gone, there would be no one left who had touched the audit or suspected anything. It was the perfect cover, and it had nearly worked. Armed with this new information, Aarav presented everything to the authorities. Documents, emails, timestamps, all traced back to Dev's private accounts. A sting operation was set in motion. Within 48 hours, Dev was arrested at the airport, attempting to flee the country with fake passports and large sums of cash. Ananya was released from custody, but she didn't return home. She didn't return to the office either. She disappeared into the background again, quietly packing her things and leaving the city before anyone could ask questions. Aarav searched for her, desperate to find the Raven he had wronged, the woman he had come to love too late. But she was nowhere. He sent letters, messages, flowers. All went unanswered. In the public eye, Aarav was once again the unshakable CEO who had handled a corporate crisis with grace. But behind closed doors, he was a man haunted by his own arrogance. He had married a brilliant, brave woman, and broken her. Then he had unknowingly fallen in love with her all over again, only to lose her once more. Months passed. Rumors faded. The company moved on. But Aarav never did. Sometimes he would sit in the quietest corner of his mansion, replaying every moment with Anya. Not the disguise, but the soul behind it. The woman he failed to see until she was